Welcome back to the Bears Baseball Network. It's been a long offseason, but we finally got baseball coming back this weekend, Bears baseball. Bernie, it's been a little while. BBN After Dark is back, and we're going to talk about everything here in 2026. But first, Bernie, I know, I've always said I love the offseason. I feel like this is where players can move mountains, but I know, Bernie, you are a huge advocate of playing a long game. I know you want to play February to November. You would love to have that long of a season. Just give me your thoughts, man. Long off season. We've been grinding. Finally getting to play games this weekend. How excited are you?
Yeah, always excited to get back out there, especially this first weekend, man. Because I know just with any team in the Bears, there's so many unknowns, so many guys that had great off seasons that are about to become superstars, and you're just waiting to see it here this first week.
Yeah, we've talked about before. Since BWL, and obviously it's had some different names in the past. Since we've had these off-season winter leagues, we kind of get a sneak preview into some of the big breakouts from the off-season. So it kind of spoils it a little bit. We kind of know who the big-time players are, but there's still a lot of questions to be answered, and hopefully we can kind of talk about it today. We're going to go over everything here in 2026, talking about all of our youth teams. We'll go from 14U all the way down to 11U, and then we'll make some award predictions at the end of the episode. So let's go ahead and start right away with 14U Burnstill. In my opinion, and probably, I guess, just factually, the best team in the Bears at the moment. I think this team, absolute monsters. Bernie, I don't know if you know your record from last year off the top of your head. Do you know?
64-11.
64. I mean, this team's absolute monsters. 64-11 last year. I think this team, once again, going for 70 wins. I think easily would have gotten 70 last year without some rainout, bad luck. And I think they can definitely go for 70 this year. It's an absolutely stacked roster. So let's go ahead and start with the biggest strength of this team, which, Bernie, obviously you can't talk about a strength for 14 Burnstill without talking about Rudy Montenegro Langley. In my opinion, the best player in the organization right now. This guy, a home run champion, both, single season and very soon to be career. This guy is going to hit over 600. He's going to drive in a ton of runs. And on top of it, playing Platinum Glove defense, right? So, Rudy Montenegro Langley, absolute beast. I don't know what there is left to say about him. Besides Rudy, Bernie, what do you think is the big strength of this 14 Burnstill team between pitching, hitting, and defense? What do you think is the biggest strength of this team?
I think to start the year, our pitching's got to be really well, or be really good. I think that even with, a couple guys out, I still have, thinking through it here, 6 guys at least I have, full confidence to go up there and throw strikes. And be very competitive against even good teams. So I think the pitching staff's going to, is a strong point of the team to start the year. I think it's got to be really good.
Owen Lewis has been a perennial Cy Young contender. Hunter Finley, of course, is a Cy Young contender at this point in his career. He was the BWL Cy Young, and I believe he was top 3 in the fall as well. This guy, both these guys can do 2 things really well. Number 1 is pound the strike zone, and number 2 is throw a lot of different pitches. And I think those 2 will continue to dominate on the mound. And then you've got some other guys who I think will step up. A guy that we've already mentioned, but not necessarily for his pitching, Rudy Montenegro Langley, who I think will take a step forward on the pitching side. This is a guy who we've always kind of known the pitching potential that was there, but I think he looked really good in BWL, and I could see him taking a step forward this season. And then, of course, you've got guys like Jacob Applehans, Connor Kennedy, Rowan Damschroeder, and Kenny Douglas, who can all throw strikes, and again, do it with multiple different pitches. So I think that's going to be a huge strength. Bernie, this team is so good that there's no real weakness on the team, but what would you say is the biggest question mark going into the March and April, the start of the season?
Yeah, I think for me it's going to be, in particular, infield defense. When guys like Owen Lewis are pitching, who's going to play short to start the year, who's going to play third. We definitely have some guys there that have proven they can do it at times, or maybe they do it for maybe 1 out of 3 practices, but we haven't had anybody really take that job yet, and I think that the job's over for the first couple weeks, and somebody's going to earn a lot more playing time for the rest of the year they're earning the first 2 weeks.
Yeah, and with guys like we talked about, Owen Lewis and Hunter Finley, it's not that they can't get strikeouts, but I would say their main thing that they do well is pound the strike zone. And if they're going to do that, you got to play great defense behind them. Like you said, Owen Lewis is a lockdown defender, but he's going to be pitching a lot of big games. How does that fit into the defense? For me, a guy I'm looking for, and maybe we'll talk about him in a minute as well when we get into our next question, but a guy I'm looking for to really take a step forward on the defensive end is Jacob Applehans. I think this is a guy that offers a lot of versatility, in my opinion. I don't know, Bernie may disagree with this, but I think he can play all 4 infield positions between first, second, short, and third. And I think it gives him a big opportunity to make an impact, especially early on in the season. So, yeah, I'm excited to see how it shakes out. I think the offense is going to figure it out. Even missing a couple key bats early in the season, I still think this offense is really, really deep. And I think the pitching staff will be a huge strength. So let's go into it, Bernie. Who do you think, and you can give me a couple names if you want, who's the biggest off-season riser? So from fall 2025 to opening day this Saturday, who do you think has risen the most in terms of, their talent level, their value from the offseason?
Yeah, I'll give you one guy to at least start with and go from there. But for me, it's got to be, in my personal opinion, Rowan Damschroeder. At least, to me, I am a full believer in Rowan is going to, knock the crap out of the ball this season. This guy's going to be, he's probably going to start the season in the 6th hole if I'm guessing. But this guy can easily move up, right? Like we said, we're missing a couple key bats early in the year. Rowan is expected to fill those shoes, and I think, in years past, Rowan's had that chance, and he's kind of missed out on it. He's been, maybe a little too passive at the plate. I saw a big, mentality change from Rowan this winter. If you just look at Rowan now, he looks 10 times more athletic. This guy has worked his butt off all off season long. And I think this is the year we finally see Rowan Damschroeder arrive at the plate.
Talk about a guy who does everything. Free swing, precision pitching, the cave. He is at the Bud Dome or working out, 4 or 5 times a week. I see this guy all the time. Again, Bernie, I was actually talking with KJ about this, the head of the cave, KJ, and I was talking about, is it one of those things where he just kind of grown into his body, or is he just worked his butt off? Because you can definitely see that kind of baby fat is mostly gone. He looks skinny but strong, compared to where he did maybe 12 months ago. And I think it's a combination of both. I think he's getting a little bit older, but also kind of growing into that body, plus putting in the effort at the gym. So, 100% in on Rowan Damschroeder. Just to give a different name, I already mentioned him, Jacob Appelhans. I think this guy is going to go from being a low-key second-team guy. At the end of the season last year, he was kind of a role player on the top team. I think he could step into some big shoes this season and be a very key contributor to the top team, especially early on in the season. I could see this guy being a top 4 hitter on this team, which is saying a lot with how stacked this lineup is. So, very, very excited for 14U Burnsville. I think this team will, again, be the best team in the Bears. So, excited to see what they can do starting the season here in March. All right, let's move on to 13U Floyd. This is a team that took a huge step forward from 2024 to 2025, and I'm anticipating another step here into 2026. This is a team that's always been able to hit. The question marks have come on the mound and on defense, but this team has always been able to rake. So when we're talking about the biggest strengths, Bernie, I think it's very clearly the offense. Give me some of the hitters that you really like on this team, Bernie. You got several of the best hitters in the organization. Who do you like to have a big 2026 from the 13U Floyd offense?
Yeah, I'll look at a kid who, we see a lot of these rookies who come in, their first offseason where they make that massive jump. And Brady Feldon came in last year as the possibly most athletic rookie we had. Can always hit for a lot of raw power. I think he hit a home run actually one of his first couple weekends with the Bears. But I've seen this guy hit a lot in Rob's cage over the offseason, and he has all the makings to be an absolute superstar, right? He's just that one click away to where if he figures it out, we're talking about a guy who's going to be in the MVP race this year.
Yeah, and speaking of MVP candidates, Owen Haynes, I think, has been consistently an MVP candidate, consistently one of the best hitters in the Bears. I think Hamilton Case has taken big steps forward every single offseason, this one included. I could see him having a monster season at the plate. And then, of course, you got Cooper Woolen, BWL MVP, hit over 500. This guy's an absolute beast. And I could see, those 4 at the top of the order is one of the best offenses in the Bear, one of the best top 4s. I think the question mark, where they fall short of 14U Burnsville and maybe even fall short of like 16U Floyd is kind of when you get to the bottom half, you get some question marks there. But top 4 for top 4, I think this is as good as anybody in the Bears. So very, very excited to see what they get from the offense. I think the biggest question mark is the pitching staff, and it's not necessarily the depth. They've got a lot of different guys, but it's that one guy, that ace, who's going to go out and be a Cy Young candidate, be a guy who can dominate those big games. So that's the big question mark for me, is going to be that ace at the top of the rotation. And a guy I can fill that role is Cooper Woolen. This is a guy who has put on some muscle in the offseason. He's added about 7 mile an hour on his fastball. He already had a very good curveball. I could see him stepping into that role as being a top end of the rotation starter. And then, of course, you got Owen Haynes, who has done it in the past, has been that big game pitcher. So excited to see what we get from them. Hamilton Case, I think it's take a step forward on the mound. You know what you're going to get from Wheaton Hainline, and then you kind of figure out the rotation from there. Guys like Carson Griffith. I know Rhett Frosto's been putting in the work on the mound as well. So you kind of build out the pitching staff, and hopefully one of those guys can step up and be an ace. I think that's the biggest question mark for 13U Floyd. Let's talk about the biggest offseason riser, Bernie. Who do you think from 2025 in the fall to as we sit here today, who's been the biggest riser from 13U?
Yeah, for me, I will pick Parker Kugler for that. Kind of along the same reasons I picked Rowan. Just look at Parker. This guy has completely changed himself the past 5 or 6 months. He looks 10 times more athletic. He's moving really well in the infield. He looks athletic. Looks like he's being a good infielder for that team, whether it's at second or third. And again, watch guy in the cage. For that cage league that we just started up, I picked him in the second round. That is how much faith I have in Kugler this season to be a massive contributor for that squad.
Yeah, I've always been a big believer in Parker Kugler. You can go back to old BBN episodes. I was always kind of singing his praises. I think this is the year he put it all together. Me and Parker actually were talking about this the other day. 2024, he joined the Bears and kind of got, he kind of earned his stripes. He figured out what's going on around here. 2025, you saw flashes of a great player. You saw flashes, but he didn't quite put it all together. And 2026 is the year he puts it all together. So very excited for Parker Kugler. Another guy I want to mention is Rhett Frosto. This is a guy who, listen, I don't think 2026 he's just going to jump up to being one of the best hitters in the Bears, but I do think he's going to take a huge step forward from where he was, over the winter in the BWL and in practices to being a big part of especially the depth of this 13U Floyd team. I think he's going to hit well. He's going to play great defense when he's in the game, and I think he's going to pitch well in the innings that he gets. So I think Rhett Frosto will be a huge addition to this team. Let's move on to 12U Floyd. This is a team that kind of starting to get their feet wet in the fall. Really first became an age of their own last spring. In the fall, they kind of started to have top team expectations, and I think this is the year that they have to start showing some results on the field. I think the fall was kind of a freebie. They were free rolling, no real expectations. I think the expectations start now for 12U Floyd. Bernie, what do you think is the biggest strength of the 12U Floyd team right now?
I don't know if you would say this is the strength of the team last year necessarily, but just because in all their guys in precision, I'm going to go with that pitching staff. I think, again, maybe, I know Kraft is probably going to be expected to be that guy, but this team has a lot of different arms in pitching. I think this team is 5-6 deep in that aspect. And then not many 12U teams can say they have that many guys with those strikes, much less from multiple pitches. Yeah,
we kind of talked about with 13U, they've got all the depth in the world, but don't really have that guy who can go out and just win a game by himself. I think you could argue 12U has several guys who can go out and dominate on any given day. The consistency still needs to be there. We saw Camden Kraft dominate at times, and we saw him have some rough outings. BWL, he was dominant. I'm expecting him to be dominant all season long, but I think Leo Papin could step into that role and be one of the best pitchers in the Bears. Benny Wanners had a great offseason on the mound. Zane Hall has looked filthy at times in precision pitching. Trey Lede is arguably the best strike thrower in the entire organization. And then you got guys like Clay Lede, Camden Kramer, Grayson Lowry, other guys who can get up there and throw strikes. I think this pitching staff is easily the biggest strength of this team. And that kind of leads to the biggest question mark, which is the offense. I think the defense is going to be serviceable and maybe even a little bit better than that, maybe above average. The pitching staff is going to be a strength. The question mark is the offense. Bernie, it's kind of like what we were talking about with 14U a couple years ago, where you got your superstars, you have Rudy and Harrison, but how do you feel at the rest of that lineup? 14U's obviously figured it out now, but 2 years ago, that was kind of the situation. To me, that's where this team is right now. I think we all kind of have the expectations of Benny Wanner being an MVP level player. Wade Kiefer has shown MVP tendencies. Brooks hasn't quite put it together, Brooks Biddle, but he's shown, the potential is there. Who do you see other than Benny, Bernie, and maybe Wade and Brooks? Besides those three, who else do you see taking a big step forward and kind of being that other guy who can dominate offensively?
Give me some candidates here.
Well, Bernie, a guy that I know that JT Byrne really likes a lot, a guy I know that Pringle, Andrew Engelken really likes a lot, is Zane Hall. And I think this is a guy who's put up the numbers, kind of similar, doesn't really have that consistency factor. Camden Kramer has had a great fall. I know Grayson Lowry has been a guy that Rob Floyd's really talked about. Clay Lede led the team in RBIs last fall. So there's guys that have shown flashes, but not quite the consistency, Bernie. Who do you see of that group kind of taking the biggest leap?
Out of those names, I'll go with Clay Lede. I heard somebody say today during practice today, they were filming this, that Clay Lede was like second on the team in doubles last season. And that sells me right there, is because you look at Clay, you think he's a small contact guy, he doesn't strike out a lot. But he wasn't that. He already had some power last year. And again, this guy worked in the cave. This guy worked all offseason long very hard. I don't see a reason why those numbers can't go up, and he's just going to be a better hitter than he was last year.
Yeah, I mean, I think, questions are going to be asked of this roster to kind of fill those spots. Obviously, Leo Papin's another guy I'm hoping takes a big step offensively. But if this team can hit, I was telling Benny Weiner this today, the pitching's going to be there. The defense is going to be there. If this team could hit, this team could very quickly, get... I'm not saying we're going to win 50 games this year, but we have that potential if we could hit well this season. So that's what I'm excited about. Now, Bernie, biggest offseason riser for this team. I'll go first. The guy who I think has had a phenomenal offseason, gone from being, a role player, a guy who can fill some innings, to, in my opinion, going to be one of the best players in the Bears, is Leo Papin. I think this guy could end up being the best pitcher on this team. I mean, I know Camden Kraft is dominant. I know Trey Lede is elite at throwing strikes, but I think Leo Papin may end up having the best stuff on this roster. And the problems he had in the fall at the plate are problems that I think are easy to fix. His problem at the plate was not being aggressive enough. His problem at the plate was not catching the ball out in front. I think those are easy to fix. It's not like he was going up there trying to tap the ball to second base, and that was the problem. That wasn't the issue. If Leo can really buy into himself being great, I could see him having a huge season. Big believer in Leo Papin. He's one of my big risers. Bernie, who do you have as a big riser for 12U?
At least in my perspective of what I thought the player was last fall versus what I think he's going to be this year, I'll go with Grayson Lowry. I think this is a guy who I'm not sold on maybe the pitching or defense yet, but this guy, if you look at him swing a bat, he looks like he has very little flaws. This guy's going to be he's a high floor player at the worst case scenario. He's going to be a good bat for this team, worst case scenario. Now, potential to be great, but this guy's going to be a contributor one way or the other for the squad.
Grayson Lowry, the power's always been there. It's big time power. It's just how consistently can he take those good at bats to keep himself in the game. I told Grayson something I thought connected with Grayson toward the end of the season. If there's one at bat he took. He's one of those guys that takes one at bat a game, gets subbed out every single game, right? He goes up there, takes his one at bat, gets subbed out, and he hit a ball off the wall, and he wasn't ready for his next at bat because he assumed he was going to get subbed out, because that's how it always been. He assumed he was going to get subbed out, so he hit a ball off the wall his first at bat and wasn't even ready for a second at bat because he assumed he was going to get subbed out. And I go, Grayson, why would I take you out? You just hit a ball off the wall, right? And I think it kind of clicked for him. It's like, whoa, it's in my power. It's my decision if I'm going to get that extra bat. He kind of assumed, didn't matter what he did, he's getting taken out. It's kind of bought in that he's in control of his destiny. I think he could really take that role and run with it this season. Big believer in Grayson Lowry. I'm excited to see what we get from him. Let's move on to 11U Nickerson. This team has at times been one of the best in the organization. At times has shown a little bit of inconsistency, but I think you can't argue the top end of this roster is still super, super elite. When you're looking at the depth of this roster, I think that's where you kind of get into the question marks, and we'll talk about that more as we go. But let's start with the biggest strength, Bernie, which is, to me, we talk about Harrison Blabaum and Rudy Montenegro Langley being a 1-2 punch. I don't know if this is quite that good, but it's pretty close, and that's Blake Nickerson and Peter Rojek. To me, the biggest strength of this team, you got two guys who can do it on all three sides of the ball. They can all hit, they can play defense, and they can pitch. Bernie, tell me about Blake and Peter. How good could these two be if everything goes right for them this year?
Yeah, I think I don't want to say a better comparison, but a good comparison, because my team was once 11U, was when we started this team, it was based around Harrison Blabaum and Owen Lewis. Harrison was the big guy who led us offensively. The offense kind of relied on Harrison, with Owen kind of being that second fiddle to Harrison. But the pitching staff relied 100% on Owen Lewis. Our Sundays were made or broke by how Owen Lewis pitched. I think that's kind of how, or kind of more like Peter in terms of he's that team's best pitcher. He takes the ball on Sundays. And, But, those two, great core to the team. And, excited to see where they build off of with some of these guys here this year.
Yeah, and I think the biggest question mark for this team, like I said, is just the depth. You got at the top of the lineup, you got two elite hitters. You got at the top of rotation, you got at least two elite pitchers, And then you got a great shortstop, you got several different guys who can play first base, you got a great center fielder, and now it's just filling out the depth around that, to me, is the biggest question mark. Bernie, when you're looking at this lineup, and maybe we'll talk about this when we get into the risers as well, besides Peter, besides Blake, who could you see taking that kind of role as the third best hitter on the team to kind of move toward a deeper lineup. Maybe give me two names, if you got them, Bernie, who could really turn this top two into a top four.
Yeah, I think the guy who I would take being the third best hitter on the team this year is, I called him Goldie, but Wyatt Gillismacher. This guy had a monster BWL, but I was high on this guy last year. He reminds me of an old first baseman we had with the Bears a couple of years ago that hit a ton of home runs. I think he can be that kind of same player. I'm trying to think of a little more depth here. I think Jackson Frazier's a big kid who gets the ball really hard. Again, will he be the fourth best hitter on the team? Maybe not, but could he be the fifth or sixth best hitter? And really bolster that depth? Yes, he could be.
Yeah, and then you've got other guys who I think you could see step up. Guys like Easton Taylor, guys like Camden Kinsey, and a guy, we'll kind of use this as a segue into the biggest offseason riser. Another guy that I have big expectations for, who I think is the biggest offseason riser for this team, is Phil Burgess. The pitching, I think he could go and to really give this team a three-headed monster rotation if Phil can take that step forward. Just being consistent. I mean, we saw he was dominant at times last year. It's just moving into that where he's doing it every single outing. You can rely on him. But I think the offense could take a real step forward. This is a guy who's proved, the arm, Bernie, is plus, and I've been talking about this a lot with my 12U catchers, is sometimes you don't have to be able to throw out runners. You just have to look like you can. If Phil can throw that laser before the game down to second base and just scare the other team from running, that's just as good as throwing out a bunch of runners. So I could see Phil Burgess taking a huge step forward this year and really kind of rounding out this core. And Bernie, you can give your thoughts on Phil Burgess, or if you got another offseason riser, who do you have as one of the biggest offseason risers from last year to this year for 11U?
Yeah, Phil's great. But again, this guy was not a bad player last year. This guy was still one of the better hitters on the team. But I think the guy I'm going to say is going to be the third best hitter, like I already talked about. It's going to be Wyatt. I think this guy, it's always good. Like right now it's Blake and Peter are the face of the team. I think a year from now, you're saying, okay, now this team has three superstars and Wyatt's the third of them.
Yeah, I could easily see that. I think this team, again, question marks maybe, but, I've always talked about this. I was talking about this with Damien the other day. One of my most fun I have coaching is when I have 7 guys fighting for 4 spots. That's when I feel like I do my best coaching. That's when I feel like I'm getting best out of players. So I think Damien's in a nice spot here where, sure, does he know who his 7 hitter is going to be 6 months from now? No, but he's got 5 different options, and he can kind of figure it out. There's several guys we haven't talked about, guys like Jack Anderson, guys like Cash Martin, who are going to get opportunities that maybe they wouldn't get on a team, on this Nickerson team a year ago, and now they're going to get those opportunities. So I'm pretty excited to see this 11U team play. Will the record necessarily be best it's ever been for this team? Maybe, maybe not, but I think they're going to answer a lot of questions and build a future that, creating a great 13U team, so I'm really excited for this 11U team. All right, Bernie, let's end the show here with some of our MVP and Cy Young predictions. We'll start, Bernie, with the favorites, and then I want you to give me a dark horse pick. But let's start with the favorites. Just going off, in my opinion, the biggest MVP candidate for each team. Obviously, you got Rudy Montenegro Langley, you've got Owen Haynes, you've got Benny Wanner, and you got Blake Nickerson. Bernie, I think Rudy easily the favorite in that 4. You can correct me if you think differently, but I think Rudy easily the favorite. Who do you think is the second favorite, Bernie, between Blake, Benny, and Owen Haynes?
Yeah, I think you got to look to who's going to be the second best team in that realm, and I think that 13U not only is going to be the second best team, but easily a 14 slips level that could end up being the best team. And if Owen Haynes is leading that offense, man, he's definitely their second favorite.
Yeah, I think Owen Haynes, he's proved, he's been a hit leader before. He's led the team in doubles before. This guy's a beast. He's going to have a great team around him. Definitely a great offense. So, yeah, I 100% agree with that, Bernie. Blake, I think, has the potential to win MVP just by putting up ridiculous numbers. Rudy and Harrison, I don't know if they won MVPs. Rudy wasn't really an MVP caliber player when Burnside had a losing record, but I know Harrison had come in the MVP race just putting up ridiculous numbers. So I could see Blake doing that as well. And then Benny Wanner, sky's kind of the limit. He's the least proven of these 4 players, but I think sky's the limit for him. Bernie, give me a dark horse candidate for the MVP. If it's not one of these 4 guys, if it's not the obvious names, who do you think could be an MVP candidate in the youth?
Yeah, I'm going to dig a little bit here at 13. We already talked about him once. Again, I think the sky's the limit. I think it's Parker Kugler. If this guy can just hit, man, playing for Rob, you're going to play. And again, if you end up being a top, 2 or 3 hitter on this team, on a team that's going to be really, really good, I think you could find yourself around the race.
For a dark horse for me, I'm going to go with Brooks Biddle. This is a guy who I think has the potential to, it's hard to say lead the Bears in home runs when you have Rudy Montenegro Langley in the organization, but I think he could be one of the home run leaders in the spring, summer. Definitely got the power for it. He's been putting the work in the gym, and I think this guy could have a monster season at the plate. And if he's the best hitter on a 12U Floyd team, let's just say that has a winning record, I think easily could be in the MVP race for Brooks Biddle. Talk about on the pitching side, Bernie. Talk about the favorites for the Cy Young Award, and then we'll talk about some dark horse candidates. Cy Young favorites, obviously, Hunter Finley, Owen Lewis, I think are kind of the 1-2 punch there. I don't know if you'd call anyone on 13U necessarily a favorite. For me, Camden Kraft, certainly a favorite, and then Camden Kensey, I would say, are the 4 favorites. Finley, Lewis, Kraft, and Kensey. Bernie, who do you think is the favorite to win the Cy Young in the youth for the spring summer?
Yeah, not trying to be overly biased here, but if 14U gets to where they want to be this year, if they want to get 70 wins, if they want to, exceed their record from last year, I think a lot is going to have to come through Hunter Finley taking the next step and being dominant against good teams. Owen Lewis has showed already that he can do it, but Finley, this is a guy who could easily lead the team in innings pitching at the end of the year and end up pitching a lot of big games Sunday for us. So I'm going to go with Hunter Finley.
Yeah, I think it's a great pick, Bernie. Obviously, anybody who's listened to me talk about players knows I love me some Hunter Finley. That would be my pick as well, but just to play devil's advocate, I'll say Camden Kraft. I mean, we've seen this guy be absolutely dominant. He was dominant in the BWL. If he comes out and puts up, 1.2 ERA and is striking out 50 hitters between the summer and spring, it's going to be hard to give it to anybody else. So I think he could easily be the favorite. Bernie, how about some dark horse candidates? If you want, I can go first, Bernie. I've already kind of talked about this guy. Leo Papin, I think, is my favorite dark horse candidate. But another guy who I think could very sneakily kind of jump into the Cy Young is Phil Burgess. I think he could come out very similar to Kraft and just dominate. Phil could easily lead the Bears in strikeouts, and it wouldn't really be a surprise. And if those strikeouts, instead of being 60 strikeouts, 50 walks, if he puts up 70 strikeouts to 20 walks, it's going to be hard not to give him the Cy Young. So, Bernie, who do you have as a dark horse for the Cy Young?
Yeah, again, I thought he was one step off last year, but it's hard not to go with Rudy. Look, I think we're going to find out within the first week or two of the season if this guy's for real on the mound. But from just watching this guy, we did a couple live at-bats during practice, and I think he faced like 14 batters, all decent hitters. They're all 14 guys who are decent hitters, and he struck out like 12 of them. Like, this guy, if he is in the zone with 2 pitches, he's going to have a sub-2 ERA. It's just that easy. He throws that hard. He's that disgusting with all 3 pitches. We're just going to find out here early in the year if he can be consistent doing that.
Bears baseball returns in 2026 this Saturday, so be sure to go out and catch yourself some Bears baseball. Bernie, we've done this. I'm sorry I didn't prepare you with this, but we've done this kind of prediction in the past. Who do you got, Bernie, hitting the first home run of 2026? In the show, last prediction, who's hitting the first home run of 2026?
I just know my team plays at 9 a.m. I know Rudy bats leadoff, but I'll go with Kenny Douglas, who I know is going to be batting too.
Bernie, a little bit of a spoiler. 12U Floyd plays on a small field. And you know who bats leadoff for 12U Floyd? Benny Wanner. I'm going to go Benny Wanner as my pick. We play at 9 a.m. as well on a small field, and I think Benny Wanner could knock the first one over the fence. Bernie, I'll go even one step further. He's going to get the first pitch he sees hit over the fence on Saturday. So be sure to watch Benny Wanner's first at bat. But that's going to do it for this episode of BBN After Dark. We'll talk to y'all next time.